Welcome in. If you are joining us today, you are probably looking for a clear, well-structured, and profound exploration of a major historical event.
Yeah, exactly.
But like me, you absolutely do not want to feel overwhelmed by just a mountain of chaotic information or dry textbook facts.
Right.
You are in exactly the right place. In this custom deep dive, we're looking at the catastrophic Mount Hood climbing disaster of May 12th, 1986.
That's a heavy one.
It really is. This was an expedition involving a group from the Oregon Episcopal School in Portland that went, well, unimaginably wrong. Okay, let's unpack this.
To really grasp the gravity of this event, we have to look far beyond the immediate tragedy. Because it's not merely a survival story.
No, not at all.
It is a profound case study in leadership, the psychology of decision-making, and the cascading catastrophic effects of small errors in extreme environments. You see, the Oregon Episcopal School ran an outdoor adventure program called Base Camp.
And from what I understand, this wasn't just some optional weekend club, right?
Exactly. It was a mandatory program for all students. But the underlying philosophy was genuinely sound. I mean, it was designed to teach real, meaningful survival skills in the rugged Pacific Northwest.
Which is an incredible environment for that kind of learning.
Absolutely. The belief was that by completing base camp, these young learners would walk away with genuine confidence, a strong sense of personal agency, and the ability to truly work as a cohesive team under pressure.
Which makes perfect sense. If you put teenagers through a physically demanding, high-stakes environment, they learn to rely on each other.
Right.
And since you, our listener, are likely familiar with the rugged nature of the Cascades, we really don't need to dwell on the basics of Mount Hood itself.
No, we know it's a massive, highly technical, glaciated peak. It's imposing. It requires ropes, ice axes, and constant vigilance against falls, hidden crevasses, and avalanches.
Yeah, they were taking the south side route, which, while heavily trafficked, is notorious for rapidly changing weather systems coming right off the Pacific. Oh, and I should mention the colorful detail about where they started.
Timberline Lodge.
Right. The group started at Timberline Lodge, a ski resort that's actually famous for appearing in the 1980 horror film The Shining.
It's an incredibly dramatic and unforgiving backdrop for an expedition that was meant to be the culmination of a year-long training process. The students had been preparing for months.
They put the work in.
They really did. They'd gone through extensive physical conditioning and first aid training precisely so they could tackle the inherent dangers of Mount Hood with that exact confidence the base camp program aimed to build.
So take us to the morning of May 12th. Who exactly is on this mountain as the sun is coming up?
We have a relatively large group setting out. The expedition was led by a 42-year-old named Father Thomas Goldman.
He was a teacher, right?
Yes, a popular philosophy and mathematics teacher at the school. And he wasn't a novice. By all accounts, he was smart, kind, incisive, and highly experienced. He had supervised many previous base camp expeditions up this exact mountain.
So he knows the route. He knows the terrain.
Intimately. Supporting him were 4 other adults. There was the 40-year-old dean of students, Marion Horwell,
Okay.
a parent chaperone named Sharon Spray, and 2 hired professional guides brought in from outside the school community.
Just to add that extra layer of safety.
Exactly. Their names were Dees Duniak and Ralph Summers. Together, these 5 adults were responsible for 15 students, all between the ages of 15 and 17.
So 20 people total starting out. But they don't all stay together, do they? Because one of the things that really stands out in the records is how well the safety protocols actually worked in the early hours of the climb.
That is one of the most striking elements of this whole timeline. At the very beginning, the group's built-in safety valve functioned flawlessly.
Yeah.
As they progressed up past the lower elevations, several climbers realized they simply weren't up for it and decided they shouldn't continue.
Which is a tough call to make when you've trained all year. Who turned back?
Well, first, 15-year-old Hillary Spray developed a severe stomachache. Despite encouragement from the group, she made the highly mature call to turn back, accompanied by her mother, Sharon.
That takes guts at that age, to be the first one to say no.
It really does. Shortly after, 16-year-old Lorca Smetana started experiencing painful leg cramps. Her friend, 16-year-old Courtney Boatsman, volunteered to escort her back down.
Good friend.
Definitely. 2 other students who were just having second thoughts followed suit. And even one of the hired professional guides, Dees Duniak, began experiencing mild snow blindness from the glare and wisely decided to head back down. What's fascinating here is that this initial self-awareness, this
Yes.
overarching willingness by both the teenage students and the adults to turn back when things weren't right, it makes the eventual disaster that much more baffling.
It really does, because it shows the culture wasn't necessarily summit at all costs.
Right.
The system was functioning. If you weren't feeling 100%, you went back. No shame. That left a core group of exactly 13 climbers pressing onward. But as they climbed higher into the late morning, the environment just turns on them.
Dramatically.
Hmm.
They were hit by a late-season maritime blizzard. It was getting significantly colder, heavy snow was starting to fall, visibility was rapidly dropping, and the winds were picking up to gale force.
And this brings us to what has to be the most heavily scrutinized moment of the entire expedition. Father Goman has been up this mountain dozens of times. He just watched several of his people turn back for minor ailments.
Yes.
Why, when faced with a literal blizzard, doesn't he pull the plug on the whole thing?
It is the defining question.
Right.
Father Goman had a well-documented history of turning groups around in the face of adverse weather. He wasn't known as a reckless cowboy,
Right.
but on this specific day, despite the dropping visibility and the howling wind, he pushed on. We have to look at this through the lens of human psychology, specifically something mountaineers call heuristic traps.
Tell me more about that, because on paper, his decision makes zero sense.
Well, one heuristic trap is the familiarity heuristic. Goman had done this exact route so many times that his brain likely auto-filled a sense of safety that wasn't actually there.
Because he had survived it before.
Exactly. He had conquered this mountain before, so his internal threat meter was artificially lowered. Combine that with the sunk cost fallacy. They had trained all year. This was the capstone event.
So they felt like they couldn't turn back now.
It's incredibly difficult for the human brain to abandon a goal when you've invested that much time and emotional energy into it. It creates a phenomenon known as summit fever.
Right, where the goal effectively blinds you to the escalating risk. You convince yourself, oh, it's just a squall, it'll pass, we're almost there.
Precisely. He seems to have genuinely believed they could reach the summit before conditions deteriorated completely. He didn't finally stop the group's upward momentum until 2 in the afternoon. By that time, visibility was practically zero. And crucially, he only stopped because the remaining hired guide, Ralph Summers, absolutely insisted that they had to turn around.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, deeply terrifying. Because deciding to turn around at 2 p.m. is only half the battle. Executing a descent in a total whiteout is practically impossible without modern GPS.
And they didn't have that. Visibility was so poor they couldn't even see their own tracks in the snow from just minutes prior. The wind was violently erasing everything. They completely lost the trail.
And when you lose the trail on a massive cone-shaped volcano in a whiteout, you lose your sense of fall line. They veered severely off course, to the point where they weren't actually progressing down the mountain at all.
No, they weren't.
They were navigating horizontally, just endlessly progressing around the mountain.
And this horizontal wandering, fighting through deep snow and screaming winds, is what triggered the first major medical crisis. 15-year-old Patrick McGinnis was the youngest and smallest member of the remaining group.
So he's burning through his energy reserves much faster.
Yes. Because of his smaller body mass, he became highly vulnerable to the extreme cold. He began suffering from severe hypothermia.
How does that manifest in those conditions?
It's rapid and terrifying. He began shivering uncontrollably, struggling to walk, losing his motor function, and eventually he became incoherent. The core body temperature drops and the brain simply stops functioning properly.
So the group has to stop, and this is where their first aid training kicks in. But it also exposes a massive logistical flaw in their gear. They decide they need to use a sleeping bag to actively warm Patrick up. But wait, how many sleeping bags did they actually pack for a summit push?
They only had one sleeping bag for the entire group of 13.
That is unbelievable. So they have one bag. What do?
We see an incredible moment of human empathy here. A 17-year-old student, Susan McClave, made a massive personal sacrifice. She climbed into that single sleeping bag with Patrick to share her own body heat.
Wow, in the middle of a blizzard.
Yes, and it worked. It took a full hour of huddling in that bag to bring his core temperature back up enough that he was coherent. It was a first aid success, but mathematically, it cost the group dearly.
Because they are just sitting there exposed for an hour.
Precisely. That hour was devastating to their overall stamina. Now, everyone was colder, everyone was more exhausted, their adrenaline was crashing, and the storm around them was only intensifying.
Not to mention the psychological toll.
Right. There was a very real, very present terror of stumbling blindly into a hidden crevasse if they kept wandering horizontally.
So they have to make another massive decision. They can't go up, they can't find down, and they can't keep walking sideways.
Right. They made the call to stop moving entirely and dig a snow cave to shelter in until the weather broke or a rescue team arrived. But once again, we see a catastrophic equipment failure that compounds their situation. For 13 people, they had exactly one shovel.
One shovel. So Father Goman and the guide, Ralph Summers, are out there trying to carve out a survival shelter for 13 bodies using a single tool. How long does something like that even take?
Far longer than they had. And this is where the reality of the timeline becomes truly agonizing. I think people often hear snow cave and they picture a cozy, insulated igloo from a survival show.
Sure.
Normally, a properly constructed snow cave, one that is dug deep, with a raised sleeping platform to let cold air sink, can actually be quite warm. But dug with minimal gear in the fading light of a screaming blizzard, this cave was a rushed, desperate nightmare.
Paint a picture of what it was actually like inside that space, because they end up in there for a long time.
It was entirely too small. You have 13 people crammed into a space barely large enough for half that number. And because they're packed so tightly, the concentrated radiant body heat of 13 people caused the snowy walls and the ceiling to constantly melt.
So it's effectively raining inside the cave.
Exactly. Which led to freezing, icy water pooling continuously on the floor where they were trying to sit and rest. They're already exhausted, and now they are soaking wet in sub-freezing temperatures. To make matters worse, the heavy, blowing snowfall constantly threatened to bury the entrance hole.
And if that hole closes, the oxygen gets consumed and they suffocate.
Right. So they had to implement a rotation where someone was constantly sitting right at the freezing opening, physically exposed to the elements, jabbing at the snow just to keep the airway clear.
So nobody is sleeping. You're sitting in a puddle of ice water, shivering violently in total darkness, terrified that the entrance is going to seal shut. And this wasn't just for a few hours. What was designed to be a temporary, one-night refuge instantly became a multi-day trap. Monday afternoon bleeds into Monday night, which bleeds into Tuesday.
And while they were trapped inside that melting, freezing cave enduring unimaginable psychological and physical torture, a massive and desperate search effort was mobilizing on the outside.
But the rescuers are dealing with the exact same mountain.
Exactly. The search and rescue teams were battling the exact same extreme weather that had trapped the climbers. The conditions were so atrocious that helicopters were entirely grounded. To give you a sense of the wind's sheer, terrifying power on Tuesday, at one point, heavy snowcat was brought up.
For those who don't know, a snowcat is essentially a massive, specialized, tank-like mountain vehicle specifically designed for navigating harsh snow. They weigh tons.
Right. And the gale force winds on the mountain were so violent that they literally overturned this massive machine.
That is almost incomprehensible. So if a literal tank is getting flipped over by the wind, the people inside that cave must realize that nobody is coming for them anytime soon.
They did. Back inside the cave, after enduring a miserable Monday night and realizing Tuesday wasn't bringing a rescue, the hired guide, Ralph Summers, made a desperate calculation. He decided they couldn't just sit in that freezing water and wait for a rescue that might never arrive. He volunteered to hike out into the blizzard to find help. And a student, Molly Shula, bravely volunteered to go with him.
Stepping out of that cave into a whiteout takes an incredible amount of psychological fortitude.
It's a massive risk. But miraculously, after hiking blindly for several hours through the storm, navigating entirely by instinct and gravity, they stumbled upon the Mount Hood Meadows ski resort.
That is incredible.
It is. Ralph immediately joined the command center of the search effort, and as soon as the weather broke just a fraction to allow it, he went up in a helicopter to try and visually guide the searchers to the cave's location.
But the mountain is vast, and a snow cave is, by definition, made of snow. It blends perfectly into the landscape.
Exactly. Even with Ralph's guidance from the air, the cave remained completely hidden in the vast white expanse. And during this agonizing waiting period, while Ralph was searching from the air, a heartbreaking fracture occurred back at the cave.
The psychological toll inside that space must have been peaking. We were talking about teenagers who have been wet, freezing, and terrified for over 48 hours at this point.
The panic set in. In a desperate, fear-driven move, 3 students, 15-year-old Allison Litzenberger, 16-year-old Aaron O'Leary, and 15-year-old Eric Sandvik, they decided they had to leave. The entrance to the cave was rapidly icing over and closing, and they felt they were going to suffocate. They physically kicked their way out through the snow.
Oh, no.
Tragically, once they were outside, the loose snow immediately filled the hole behind them. They couldn't get back in even if they wanted to. Exposed to the full force of the blizzard, they set off walking, hoping to find civilization like Ralph and Molly had.
But conditions were just too brutal.
Way too brutal. They didn't make it far. They succumbed to the severe cold after hiking only a short distance. Their bodies were discovered on Wednesday morning by the search teams.
Which is just a gut-wrenching moment for the rescuers. But objectively speaking, finding those 3 young students did provide a grim utility for the operation, right?
It did. Finding them helped the rescue teams significantly narrow their search grid. They knew the cave had to be within a certain radius of where the teenagers fell. But as Wednesday dragged into the late afternoon, the storm finally started to clear. Yet the main group still hadn't been found. The sun was going down, and the teams were exhausted.
This is where an incredibly unlikely hero enters the story, and it completely shifts the momentum. Master Sergeant Richard Harder.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how high-stakes operations actually play out, the human element here is deeply poignant. Master Sergeant Harder was an Air Force reservist, and he was actually doubted by a lot of his own colleagues.
Really? Why?
He had a reputation among his peers for participating in very few successful rescue missions where people were brought back alive. In fact, his colleagues had given him a dark gallows humor nickname. They called him Bagger.
Let's explicitly clarify that because it's pretty dark. They called him Bagger because he usually only showed up in time to recover body bags. He wasn't known for finding survivors.
Exactly. It's a terrible moniker to carry in that line of work. But on this specific Wednesday, Bagger was the one who saw what no one else did. He went up in a helicopter, looked at the terrain, analyzed the wind patterns and the trajectory from where the 3 students were found, and he made a highly calculated guess.
Okay.
He dropped a smoke bomb exactly where he believed the cave had to be located under the drifts.
He trusts his gut, drops the smoke, and then he gets on the ground to lead the effort himself.
He led a foot team into that specific target area. They were using a technique called a probe line.
Where they stand shoulder to shoulder.
Yes, standing shoulder to shoulder, driving long metal poles deep into the snowpack, feeling for a hollow space or, tragically, a body, and just 20 minutes before the sun went down.
Wow, cutting it close.
Incredibly close. 20 minutes before darkness and plummeting temperatures would have forced the teams to abandon the search and leave anyone inside for yet another freezing night, one of the probes punched through into empty space. They struck the cave.
So what does this all mean? When they finally dig out that entrance and get to the people inside, what is the reality of the situation? Because they've been in there since Monday afternoon. It is now Wednesday evening.
When we look at the final toll of this ordeal, it is simply devastating. Out of the 11 people who were left in that cave when the rescue arrived, only 2 survived.
Just 2?
Yes. 16-year-old Britton Clark miraculously survived and eventually made a full recovery. 15-year-old Giles Thompson also survived, though his frostbite and tissue damage were so severe he had to have both of his lower legs amputated.
That is just awful.
Everyone else inside that cave passed away from severe hypothermia.
That is a staggering loss of life for one school community.
It was. 15-year-old Tasha Amy, 16-year-old Richard Hayter Jr., 17-year-old Susan McClave, who, remember, had so bravely shared her warmth with Patrick on the first day.
Yeah, the sleeping bag.
They all passed away. As did 15-year-old Patrick McGinnis, the 40-year-old Dean Marion Horwell, and the 42-year-old leader, Father Thomas Goman.
I can't even imagine the fallout in the Portland community after a loss like that. Naturally, when something of this magnitude happens, there are investigations. What did the official inquiries find?
Following the disaster, an official inquest was held to establish the objective facts of what went wrong. The goal wasn't just to assign blame, but to understand the mechanics of the failure. The findings highlighted 2 major compounding failures. First was a stark lack of adequate equipment for a group that size facing a technical mountain environment.
We already mentioned the single shovel and single sleeping bag.
Right, which was egregious, but they were also lacking sufficient crampons.
And for anyone who hasn't done technical ice climbing, crampons are the heavy metal spikes that you strap to the bottom of your climbing boots. They are absolutely essential for getting traction on steep, icy routes like the upper sections of Mount Hood. To not have enough of those is a critical logistical oversight.
Exactly. The lack of gear removed their margins for error. But the most critical error identified by the inquest was behavioral. It was Father Gallman's failure to turn the group around when the weather first shifted and the other students were heading down.
Yeah.
Given his extensive experience and his history of making the right call, his decision to push forward into the storm was officially characterized in the inquest as an inexplicable and grave lapse of judgment.
Though, as we discussed earlier with the summit fever and sunk cost fallacy, we can sort of see the psychological traps that made the inexplicable, unfortunately, very real.
Yeah.
The brain plays tricks when the summit is so close. How did the school navigate the aftermath?
The legacy of this event fundamentally changed the Oregon Episcopal School and the broader community's approach to outdoor education. The school paid out extensive settlements to the grieving families, with the final civil cases concluding in 1988. But they didn't just sweep it under the rug. Today, the school holds a special annual service. It's dedicated to remembering the climbers, ensuring that current and future students can learn something of real, lasting value from a tragedy that claimed so many young lives.
That is a powerful way to honor them.
If we step back, synthesizing all of this, what we're really looking at is the profound fragility of human judgment when it is placed under extreme pressure. It shows us how a timeline of minor, seemingly manageable deficits, missing crampons, packing one shovel, bringing one sleeping bag, can compound with a single heuristic trap to create an irreversible catastrophe.
And that knowledge, that specific mechanics of failure, is exactly why we do these deep dives. Because understanding how quickly a situation can spiral out of control is a vital tool for your own critical thinking. Whether you are leading a corporate team, managing a high-stakes engineering project, or just navigating complex, high-pressure decisions in your daily life, the psychological traps of how small errors cascade are entirely universal.
This raises an important question.
It does. And it's a question we want to leave you with today, something for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. If a highly experienced, intelligent, and deeply caring leader like Father Goman could succumb to such an uncharacteristic and fatal lapse in judgment just a few hours into a change in the weather, how robust are your own personal safety nets? When you find yourself deeply invested in reaching a summit in your own life or career, what objective frameworks do you have in place to tap you on the shoulder and tell you when it is time to turn back? Thank you so much for joining us for this custom deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep evaluating those safety nets, and we will catch you next time.